Hi, third graders. It's Mrs. Moore here. I'm here to teach you day 2 of our bar graph lesson. By the end of today, you will be able to make your own bar graph to represent the data presented in a table. You will also be able to look at a data set and select an appropriate scale for your bar graph. Before we get started, I would just like you to consider all of the wonderful information you learned yesterday and what you already know. So, yesterday we learned all about how to interpret a bar graph. Pause the video and tell me, where do your eyes go first when interpreting a bar graph? And what are the components of a bar graph? I know you were able to say that you always look at the scale first, because the scale is just that special number line used to show the quantities for each category. The reason it's important to look there first is because scales change depending upon the bar graph, which you'll figure out today when you select your own scale. Sometimes it could be 2, sometimes it could be 5 or 10, or even 50 or 100. So you have to look at the scale first so that you're able to see what it's increasing by, so you can understand what the bars represent. After the scale, you go right to the title, and you're right. The title is like the main idea. It tells what the entire graph is about. This one is all about students' eye color. After the title, where do you go? That's right, my friends. You go to the categories. You look at the categories and you understand what they're representing. So here is the eye color, and here is the number of students with each eye color. And you guys know that the categories are related, because here it shows the eye color and the number of students that have that eye color. So the categories and bar graphs are related. Of course, everything is related to that main idea, which is students' eye color. Wonderful. Friends, as we move forward, would you please get out your picture graph and bar graph resources from our previous lessons so that you can have them right next to you? Wonderful. So I want to talk a little bit more about what you already know. So please pause the video and look at bar graphs and picture graphs and tell me, what do they have in common and how are they different? Maybe think of 2 things they have in common and 1 way that they're different, and jot it down on your scratch paper. Thank you. I hope you were able to determine that they're the same because they have the same purpose. Both of them have the purpose to compare data. They're also the same because both bar graphs and picture graphs have titles that tell what the whole graphs are about, and categories, which breaks the data into specific categories to tell about the specific types of data. But we know they're also different. How are they different? You're right, mathematicians. They're different because picture graphs use symbols to display data, and bar graphs use these scaled bars that you learned all about yesterday. Okay, make sure you have the bar graph resource right next to you or pulled up on your screen, because it's going to really help you during today's lesson. Third graders, today we get to actually make our own bar graph. The first thing we do is we look closely at the data set. It's this table that gives us the specific numbers. Okay, so the title is Second Grade Teacher. Ooh, and the categories are all of UPP's second grade teachers: Mrs. Kim, Miss Meddock, Miss Powers, Mrs. Dia, Mrs. Hardwick. Ooh, and the category over here is the number of kids that were in each second grade's teacher's class. So 6 kids were in Miss Kim's, 8 were in Mrs. Meddock's, 5 were in Mrs. Powers, 10 in Mrs. Diaz, and 9 in Mrs. Hardwick's. Awesome. Okay, so before I start to show what I know and put my information on my bar graph, I need to determine an appropriate scale. You'll see that we're supposed to look at the scale first, but it's covered up. And there's a reason for that, boys and girls. The reason is because I want us to determine the scale together. There's a couple things to consider when selecting a scale. You know it needs to be continuous. It needs to increase by the same amount on each horizontal line. So I start just like picture graphs. I say, is there a factor that goes into each multiple in my data set? If not, is there a factor that I could split in half to show or represent each number in this data set? Well, let's see. Would 1 work? Well, 1 often doesn't work because I need to be able to fit all of this data, all of these totals on this bar graph. So let's see if I counted by 1. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Ooh, if I made my scale 1, the number of kids in Mrs. Dia's class could not be represented. It's too small. It only goes to 9. Let's try 2, because I know 2 is a factor that goes into 6, 8, and 10. But I also know that just because 5 and 9 don't go into 2, 2 doesn't go into them perfectly, they could still be represented if they were just right in between those two numbers or those two multiples of 2. Let's try 2, boys and girls. Ooh, so 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18. Could all of this data be represented on this graph? Yes, because I know that 10 would be right here and all of the other numbers could fit, so perfect. And also, I know that 9 could just go right in between 8 and 10, so I could represent it all perfectly. Pause this video and write down why 2 is an appropriate scale. I hope you were able to say that it's large enough so that each total can fit, but it's not too large that the bars will be very small. So we did a perfect job. Okay, so now let's draw our bar graph together. So boys and girls, either have this graph drawn on your scratch paper or print it out or in your packet so that you're able to do this with me. So get your pencil ready. We know that Miss Kim had 6 students from our class in her class last year. So I need to show that, and I'm going to get my bar tool ready. I'm going to show that by showing that Miss Kim had 2, 4, 6 students from our 3rd grade class in her class last year. 6 students had Miss Kim last year. Let's make sure that I showed that. Yes, Kim had 2, 4, 6 students in her 2nd grade class from our class, because this whole thing is about our class's 2nd grade teachers. So our class had 6 students in Miss Kim's class, and I showed that perfectly. Okay, now let's do Mrs. Meddock. How many students from our class were in Mrs. Meddock's class? You're exactly right. There were 8. So 8 is perfectly represented on this horizontal line. So all I have to do is use my bar tool to show that Mrs. Meddock had 8 students. Pause the video and you guys make sure that you're caught up. You draw bars, use rectangles to show that Miss Meddock had 8 of our students in her class last year and Miss Kim had 6. Perfect. You can even shade those in using your pencil. Mrs. Powers is a little trickier. Pause the video and point on the screen how far up we would draw our bar to show that Mrs. Powers had 5 students. Where would that go? You're right. You guys know that 5 comes right in between 4 and 6. So we would draw Mrs. Powers' bar right in between 4 and 6 to show. You're exactly right. We would draw Mrs. Powers' bar right in between 4 and 6 because 5 of the students in our class were in Mrs. Powers' class in 2nd grade. Perfect job. If you need to pause the video to get caught up, please do so. Next is Mrs. Dia. Well, 10 of our students in our class were in Mrs. Dia's class last year. So I know my bar needs to go all the way up to the line representing 10 to show that 10 students from our class had Mrs. Dia last year. Last is Mrs. Hardwick. You guys pause the video and draw a bar to represent the number of students in Mrs. Hardwick's class last year. Great bar graph, you're right. I did Miss Hardwick's bar halfway between 8 and 10 to represent 9 students. Excellent. We're going to start one more together that you'll get to finish by yourself, third graders. Take a second to either pull this page out of your packet or draw it with me. Either way works perfectly. So we're going to start by selecting a scale. We know that's so important. So let's just start by understanding our data set. Favorite foods in third grade? Ooh, and we have the number of kids. And we know that that shows the number of kids who liked each food. Our food options are pizza, burgers, nachos, and pasta. Okay, so we have to select a scale. The way that we do that, boys and girls, is by determining, is there a multiple that goes into all of these numbers that's big enough to represent all of these numbers? Oh my goodness. Okay, let's look. So I could maybe do 5 because 5 goes into all of these multiples. So that would be a good factor, but let's see. 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45. Oh no, nachos and pizza wouldn't fit. So let's try another one. What if I did, pause the video, and what would you use for your scale? Did you guys determine that 10 would be a really good scale? Because I could represent all of these numbers and they would all fit. Well, let's double check. 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100. Yes, they would all fit. I'm going to have you guys finish this graph by yourselves, and I'm going to have you use this graph to answer some questions for your assignment today. You will also get the opportunity to create one more graph by yourself today. I cannot wait to see your excellent work and to grade your paper. On Google Classroom, this is what your assignment looks like for today. You will notice we selected this scale together. For the next page, you will have the opportunity to look at a data set and select your own scale. Remember, you ask yourself, is there a factor that goes into each multiple in the data set? Or if not, could that factor be split in half to represent the values in a data set? You also have to make sure that your scale is large enough so that each total can fit. Boys and girls, get right to work. I cannot wait to see your amazing assignment.